Hey there neighbors, Kevin here with eTrailer, and today we're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install MORryde's upgraded rubber equalizers in conjunction with their upgraded suspension kit here on our 2022 Genesis Toyhauler travel trailer. If you experience some road shock and vibration from your trailer as you're going out on those long trips and you're wanting to kind of correct that problem so you have a much more enjoyable ride quality, then one of the easiest ways to do that is to actually come down to your trailer suspension and swap out your equalizer for one that has a cushioning device installed on it. So typically what you're going to find with most trailers, especially right from the factory, is just that standard piece of steel equalizer that doesn't really have any support to it and doesn't have any kind of travel that it can really allow for. Now with MORryde, they've added in a rubber cushion right here on the top, so anytime we're shifting that load from the front axle to the back axle or vice versa, it's going to hit that bumper right there, and it's going to help kind of take out that vibration, the shock, and it's also going to want to force that load back onto that specific axle so it's not shifting so much and causing chucking with the trailer. Along with that, they've also added a slot at the bottom here, so when we're getting those bumps in the road, it now has a little bit more room to travel, so your suspension can kind of come up just a bit more and handle that shock right here instead of traveling up the frame rail into your tow vehicle. So the main difference between our shackle bolts and wet bolts is going to be that bronze bushing inside of there and then the ability to actually grease it. So with a nylon bushing, you don't have to grease it at all, and you actually wouldn't want to because the grease would actually end up destroying the nylon bushing just because the two chemical compositions do not mix well together. With the wet bolt and the bronze bushing, being able to lubricate that will help your suspension kind of flow back and forth a lot better and would last a lot longer because you're now adding in grease and really kind of keeping it maintained. So this is one where it is a lot nicer because it gives you that smoother ride quality, but at the same time you do need to make sure that you are regularly maintaining this, adding in a couple pumps of grease every couple of months if you're not really towing too much. If you are a heavy tower, maybe every couple of weeks instead, just making sure that you keep this nice and clean, and that way you don't have anything start to break down on you. Now those nylon bushings, they'll last for 5-ish years typically before they start to degrade, but once they do, what happens is your bolts inside of there start to kind of wobble around because now we have a little bit of space in there, and then what ends up happening is the shackle straps go, and then also you can end up messing up the hangers as well because now you got more space in there for it to kind of wiggle around. So it's super important that you are doing your regular maintenance on your trailer, whether you have wet bolts and bronze bushings or nylon bushings and just standard bolts, to just really make sure you're doing that routine maintenance. But with the wet bolts, it should last a whole lot longer. Now your equalizer is going to come alone. It won't have the wet bolts with it. It will have bronze bushings already pressed into each bolt hole, so you will want to make sure that you pick up some wet bolts if you don't already have some in your current suspension when you're swapping this out, so that way you can utilize those bronze bushings. Along with that, you'll probably want to just go ahead and upgrade your wet bolts or up to wet bolts if you have standard bolts in general, and your shackle straps. With the standard shackle straps that you have, they're typically about 1/8 of an inch, maybe just a tiny bit thicker, maybe like 3/16, whereas this one is a full 3/8. So we've got a lot thicker of a strap here. So now we don't have to have that worry of what we usually see is as the suspension starts to wear over time, you'll see that the hole that's inside of here will start to oblong. Whereas with our MORryde shackle straps, they're so thick, it's not going to ever have that opportunity. So this shackle strap is going to last us probably a lot longer than even the lifespan of our trailer versus those other shackle straps that you're maybe only going to get 5 to 7 years out of. So now we've gone over a little bit of the basics. Why don't we go back? Before I installed this, I did a little scene for you guys where I kind of show and compare the two and give you a little bit of a closer look so that you can actually see what the difference is between these two. So why don't we show you that now, and then we can start talking about how difficult it's going to be to actually do this install. All right, so taking a little look at our setup currently, we have our standard equalizer here, and this is going to be just a solid hunk of steel. This is not going to have any kind of cushioning at all with it, so when it goes kind of back and forth, when it's shifting that weight between the two axles, it's not going to have any kind of rubber to stop that like we do with our CRE 3000. So if you look on the inside right here, there's a giant chunk of rubber that runs the whole length of the top here, and as that weight starts to shift back and forth, it's going to press on those rubber bumpers there, and that's going to help kind of cushion any kind of harsh shocks that we might feel as we're hitting rough bumps in the road. And then it's also going to help trying to force that weight back towards the axle, so that way it's not really pushing back and forth and giving you a chucking motion. Along with that, so there is a bit of travel with this as well. So if we look down at the bottom here, we've got this slot, and that is also going to be butting up against our rubber shock in the top here, because now that up and down motion, we're going to have a little bit of room here for it to kind of travel, press up against that shock or rubber bumper in there, and then kind of have that drop right back down, and really just kind of help support our suspension, so that way we're stopping all of that road shock and vibration down here at our wheels instead of having it travel up our trailer into our tow vehicle. Now, when we're picking out our equalizer, we want to make sure that we're matching up with the same spacing. So what I would want to do is measure the spacing from bolt hole to bolt hole on our equalizer, which with this specific one, it looks like it's roughly 5.5, maybe 5 5/8. I'd assume 5 5/8 because I know there are upgraded versions that are matching that. The one that our neighbor picked out is 6.5, so we've got an inch difference here. This is a little bit wider. So you can see right now our shackle straps are sitting way too far out. We don't want them that wide out. We want them a little bit closer in. But if we look over at the other side, which I already have completed, they're sitting a little bit too close. And I'm not a huge fan of that. It will still work, but it's going to hit those rubber bumpers a lot sooner. So it could end up giving a little bit stiffer of a ride quality. And the solution to that is, well, now we're going to be replacing our leaf springs as well and trying to find a size that's going to match up to where we can have that sit right with how our hangers are welded onto our frame. So honestly, it is a lot easier if you just go with the exact same size, so then you don't have to try and figure out and hope that there is a sizing that's going to match up perfectly with your leaf springs. So if you can, definitely do that. If you're just a little bit off, I'd say if you're going more than an inch over of what you already have, then you're probably going to need to replace the leaf springs as well. I wouldn't really go too far out because we're really looking for kind of a W shape here with our equalizer and our shackle straps. So now we've talked about everything that has to do with our suspension upgrade here. Why don't we talk about the actual install? First thing, you're going to want to have jacks so that you can actually lift up, take your wheels off, and support the trailer. I'm using 2 jacks, one at the front of the frame, one at the back of the frame, and then I also use some bottle jacks on my axles so that way I can raise and lower them so that I can get everything lined up properly. You're definitely going to want that so you can make the job a whole lot easier. Aside from that, installing and replacing your shackle straps, wet bolts, and your equalizers really isn't tough. It's just a little bit time consuming. Definitely a dirty job, especially if your trailer is one that's out off-roading, kind of like this one was. You can see it looks like they hit something. They got a bunch of mud all over the front of the hub right there. But overall, this is something I think you could do yourself, but you maybe don't have the space to do it. I know a lot of people don't really have a giant lot to bring their trailer to and actually work on. So if you're one of those people and you don't have the space to work on it, or you just don't have the time, please feel free to use our dealer locator, and you can enter in your zip code to find a shop near you and get it professionally installed. If you're wanting to do this yourself, then stick around and I'll walk you through the process. So to start off our install, we're going to be removing our hanger bolts so that we can drop our suspension out. We'll also be popping out the shackle straps because we are saving our leaf springs for this install. We're not going to be replacing them. If you are replacing the leaf springs at the same time and you're replacing your U-bolts as well, then you can just pop out the 3 bolts, grab the whole suspension system all in one, and just toss it and make your install a little bit quicker. But I'm going to get on the inside here, and on the inside, the nut side, it's going to be 11/16 typically, and the outside is going to be 13/16 for that bolt head. So I'm going to be using a 13/16 wrench on the bolt head because I don't want that spinning inside of our hangers, because on each one of these bolts, just under the head, there's a bunch of splines, and those bite into our hanger, and what that does is help prevent that bolt from spinning around and making that hole inside of our hanger wider and oblong. And then if that, if that ends up happening, we end up having way too much play with our suspension, and then it'll eventually fail on us. So we want to make sure that bolt is nice and tight in our hanger. So preventing it from moving is the best way to do that. So we'll pop this on. I'll get under there with my impact, and I'm going to pop each one of those nuts off, and then we'll just hammer them on out. and we can get started replacing them. Now, one other thing we should do, I'm already set up with a bunch of jacks. I have my trailer lifted up by this frame, so that way I have my suspension nice and free. I've got bottle jacks under the axles, so that way I can kind of move them up and down, because as we do this, you're going to have to fight the leaf springs to get everything lined up perfectly. Typically, the outer hangers and then connecting to your shackle straps, one side will go on real easy, and then the other side's going to fight you. So that's where that bottle jack comes into play, where you can kind of raise or lower the axle and get it to move exactly how you need it to. You may also need a pry bar sometimes, especially if you're doing one side and then the other side drops. So I've only lifted one side of my trailer to try and prevent that. Essentially what happens is once you take the weight off by lifting it from the frame, the shackle straps will just want to drop down, because all of that weight and the wheels of the axle, all that's just going to pull down on it. So that'll kind of help prevent it, but what happens is the axle kind of twists itself if it drops, and then it fights you, because then it kind of throws off the leaf spring here, and then it makes your job a little bit harder. So just keep in mind, make sure you're prepared, make sure you have plenty of jack stands and bottle jacks, so that way you can get the job done. So at this point, I'm now going to get back under there. I've got my hammer and I've got a punch. Punch is going to help. Sometimes these like to get stuck, especially in the hangers, and then you can use the punch to just force that bolt all the way out. So I'm going to get down there and hammer them all out. So now at this point, we're going to pop out our nylon bushings in our leaf springs, so that way we can swap over to our bronze bushings. And then we can start getting our bolts in, we can get our equalizer in and be all good to go. I'm gonna just use a big flathead screwdriver, and I kind of go in at an angle and just kind of, what I like to do is force in one side so it kind of folds over itself, and then force the other side over that, and then with those two kind of facing each other, you can take your screwdriver and just go straight against it and push the whole thing out. Now, if it doesn't want to cooperate, sometimes these want to just keep folding up on you. You can also dig in a little bit with the screwdriver and then try prying it out. This one looks like it may have had some water sitting there, so it's just kind of corroded into it. There we go. We'll just keep working along. We'll do both sides of our leaf spring. Our equalizer is already going to have the bronze bushings in it, so we won't have to mess with those at all since they're all ready to go. So here's what I was talking about, kind of with prying on it. You can dig in a little bit. And then pull it out that way. All right, now for our bronze bushings, I'm gonna take one of the old bolts that we just took out, and I'm gonna drop that in to our bronze bushing, so that way I'm not hammering on the lip of our bronze bushing, because you can end up damaging it. So we'll pop it in just like that. Tap it in. Tap our bolt out, and all good to go. So for the outer ones, like I was saying before, the jack is key to getting this a lot easier. I just lowered this axle just a little bit so I can get it past the hanger to get our other bushings out. So now what I'm going to do is put in my hanger bolt for my equalizer, and on these wet bolts there's going to be a little opening for the grease to pop out from, and we want that to either be in the 3 o'clock or the 9 o'clock position. So I think I'm going to go with probably 9 o'clock. That way it's facing towards the front of the vehicle. Just pop that through. I may need to raise my jacks up just a bit here though. Alright, now we got plenty of room. Got that at 9 o'clock. And at this point, I'm going to throw the flange nut on the back And what we're going to need to do is have a socket that we do not care about anymore, because we're going to be using that to beat this into place so that we don't end up hitting our grease zerk fitting. I have a 9/16 socket that I've just been using to hammer these in with. I hang on to it, so this is going to be a sacrificial socket. If you're someone who's going to be doing this a lot, I would just hang on to one and reuse it over and over and over again. All right, now I got my socket on here, and as you can see, it's all beat in at this point. But that's going to give us room to hit the head of the bolt without hitting the grease zerk fitting. Definitely recommend some hearing protection, because this does get loud, especially if you're hammering from the inside out. A lot of people like to have their grease zerk fitting on the inside, just so that way you have access to it without taking the wheels off. In my opinion, I like having it on the outside. I think it's a little bit easier to actually get access to it, so you're not having to lay into the trailer every time you want to grease up. And if you're taking the wheels off anyway to check other stuff, you might as well just have these on the outside so you can get to them easier. Now this is going to be a process though. We'll hammer in a little bit, you'll see it kind of bite in, but then you'll want to go to the back, tighten up that nut, because it'll keep pushing out further and further as we tighten it down. And if you get to a point where you're sitting there hammering on it and it just will not go in, go on the back with your wrench and you can kind of crank down on that for a little bit. To do so, you'll need a 3/4 inch wrench, and then you can tighten it down a little bit more and draw that bolt in. Looks like we're fully seated here now. We have some wiggle room. Let me tighten this up more.
Now using a 13/16 wrench and 3/4 inch socket with a torque wrench, I'm going to torque these down on the nut side. The specifications listed in the instructions. All right, we still got play. That's what we're looking for. Nice and tight, but we still want movement because we need our suspension to flow back and forth.
All right, now we can do our shackle straps. So you'll take off one of the straps and the nuts, obviously, and we'll pop that in. Now with this, you can't get the 3 or 9 o'clock because they're usually facing either up or down. I prefer up, so that way you at least have gravity on your side to help kind of drop that grease down to the bottom. And we may need to play around with our jacks just a bit to get this to fully line up, but at least for the first one, you can just move the equalizer. And then after, for this other one, I'm definitely going to have to kind of play with the jacks just to get everything lined up properly. But in the meantime, we're going to throw on the shackle strap on the back here, and then we'll have 2 flange nuts to put on. And it's going to be the same thing as that center hanger. We're just going to tighten them down and then torque them to spec. We're going to need to lower this just a bit. All right, so now I'm gonna get my bolts in for my outer hangers, and I raised up my axle a bit with the jack. I'm lined up height-wise, but I'm a little bit pulled in here just because our equalizer's kind of pulled up like that. So what I'm gonna do is just use my pry bar, and I'm gonna press against the eyelet of our leaf spring and then leverage that against the casing here on our equalizer, and that's gonna give me that little 1/16 of an inch that I need here to line up perfectly. So that way I can slot my bolt right through, keeping in mind that I'm putting my grease zerk opening at 9 o'clock here. Maybe go up just a smidge more. I think I overdid it too. Nope, there we go. Through to the other side. All right, now we can start hammering in and get our flange nut on there too. Now I'm gonna do the same thing over on the other side, and then I'll come back, I'll torque these down and my shackle strap bolts down. Need this equalizer to pop over. All right, now that everything's torqued down to spec, we're just going to lubricate our wet bolts. I'm using a high temp grease, which you can also pick up here at eTrailer. And what we're looking for is, you can see, I've got it coming out in between my shackle strap and my eyelet here. So we know it's getting through there. Now that first time of going out and kind of driving this around, I'd probably add a little bit more afterwards, just to have it fully kind of move through here as the suspension rocks back and forth. Sounds good. Now we have our wheels all torqued down, we'll do the same thing over on the other side, and that's going to do it for our installation. Well, that's going to do it for our look at and installation of the MORryde upgraded suspension kit, all in conjunction with the MORryde rubber equalizers here on our 2022 Genesis Toyhauler travel trailer. My name's Kevin, and if you still have some questions about what's going to be the right suspension upgrade for your travel trailer, please feel free to reach out to us via our Ask the Experts link, a comment on this video, or a phone call to our customer service department, and we'd be happy to help you out on your journey.